I watched my mother pour wine into her glass with the same deliberate precision she used for everything in her life. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered, even though nothing had changed since I moved out 6 months ago. Same oak table, same cream-colored walls, same feeling of being 12 years old and waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. "Danielle, you're not eating," my father said, gesturing toward my untouched plate of roasted chicken. "Everything all right?" I was 32 years old. I owned a penthouse in downtown Minneapolis that I had purchased with money I earned through 14-hour shifts at the hospital, weekend consulting gigs, and investments I researched myself at 3 in the morning when sleep wouldn't come. I had worked as a pharmaceutical sales director for 8 years, climbing from entry-level representative to regional leadership, while my colleagues wondered how I made it look effortless. The truth was simple. Nothing about my success had been effortless. Every promotion came from staying later than everyone else. Every major account came from preparations that started weeks before the pitch. Every dollar in my bank account represented a sacrifice I made when other people my age were enjoying their 20s. But sitting at this table, I felt like I was still the older daughter whose job was to make things easier for everyone else. "I'm fine," I said, cutting into the chicken. "Just tired from work." My sister Victoria sat across from me, scrolling through her phone with the casual indifference of someone who had never worried about much of anything. She was 28, 4 years younger than me, and had spent the past decade floating between apartments, jobs, and relationships with the kind of frequency that would have alarmed most parents. Not ours, though. Our parents saw her instability as proof that she needed more support, more understanding, more chances to find herself. I saw it as evidence that she had never faced a single consequence in her life. "Victoria's lease is ending next month," my mother said suddenly, setting down her wine glass with a soft click. Her tone was light, conversational, like she was mentioning the weather. "She's been looking for a new place, but you know how expensive everything has gotten. Rent is absolutely outrageous these days." I felt something tighten in my chest. I kept my expression neutral, kept chewing my food like this was normal Sunday dinner conversation. "The market is tough right now," I agreed carefully. Victoria glanced up from her phone, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Anticipation, maybe, or entitlement dressed up as hope. "Your father and I have been talking," my mother continued, reaching across the table to pat Victoria's hand. "And we think it makes the most sense for her to move into your old apartment. You're not using it anymore, and it would solve everything. She could move in next week." There it was. The decision made without my input, presented as a foregone conclusion, wrapped in maternal warmth. My old apartment in Uptown was a beautiful 2-bedroom unit I had rented for 5 years before buying my penthouse. The lease was in my name. I had kept it because I was considering subletting it to a colleague who needed temporary housing while relocating from Chicago. I had options, plans, none of which involved handing it over to my sister like a participation trophy. "Next week?" I repeated, buying myself time to think. "It's perfect timing," Victoria said, finally joining the conversation. She smiled at me, and I remembered her as a child, always knowing exactly when to deploy that smile to get what she wanted. "I've already started packing. Mom said you'd probably be cool with it since you have that fancy new place and everything." Fancy new place. As if I had won it in a lottery instead of earning every square foot through years of work that left me exhausted and occasionally wondering if I had given up too much of my 20s to ambition. As if my penthouse was a lucky break instead of the result of calculated financial planning that started when I was 23 and realized nobody was going to hand me anything. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with that expression I knew too well. The one that said she had already decided, and my role here was to agree gracefully. To be the good daughter who made things easy for everyone. To smooth over Victoria's latest crisis with my resources, my planning, my space. I thought about the conversation I had avoided having with them 6 months ago when I bought the penthouse. The one where I wanted to tell them I was tired of being the safety net, tired of watching Victoria stumble through life while I caught her every time. I had swallowed those words because I didn't want to be the bitter older sister. I didn't want to be petty or small or ungrateful for the childhood they had given me. But sitting here now, watching my mother redistribute my property like she was dividing up Halloween candy, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you realize a pattern isn't going to break on its own. "Sure, Mom," I heard myself say. My voice was calm, even pleasant. "That sounds fine." The relief on my mother's face was immediate. Victoria actually squealed, bouncing slightly in her chair like she was still 16. My father nodded approvingly, already moving on to ask about my work projects, as if we hadn't just given away my apartment in the span of 30 seconds. I smiled and finished my chicken, listening to Victoria talk about her plans for redecorating, her ideas for making the space her own. Nobody asked if I had other plans for the apartment. Nobody wondered if perhaps they should have consulted me before announcing this decision. Nobody seemed to notice that I had barely said 10 words since arriving for dinner. I left an hour later, hugging my parents and waving to Victoria as she scrolled through furniture websites on her phone. I drove back to my penthouse in silence, watching the city lights blur past my window. When I walked through my front door and saw the space I had created for myself, I felt the weight of the evening settle across my shoulders. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out over Minneapolis. Somewhere across the city, Victoria was probably already texting her friends about her new apartment. My mother was probably feeling satisfied that she had solved another problem. My father was probably watching television, confident that his family was well cared for. And I was standing here, realizing that I had just let them do it again. Let them take what was mine and redistribute it according to their sense of fairness, which always seemed to tilt in Victoria's direction. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't going to swallow my frustration and move on. This time, I was going to let them learn what happened when they assumed I would always say yes. I set down my water glass and walked to my desk, pulling out the folder I had put together 2 weeks ago. Inside were rental agreements, tenant applications, and contact information for the colleague who needed housing. I had been waiting to finalize everything, giving myself time to think through the logistics. I didn't need that time anymore. My decision was suddenly crystal clear. The next morning, I woke at 6 and went for a run along the Mississippi River. The September air was cool against my skin, and the city was quiet in that brief window before everyone started their Monday routines. I ran 5 miles, pushing myself harder than usual, letting my body burn off the frustration that had kept me awake past midnight. By the time I returned to my penthouse, showered, and dressed for work, I had a plan solidified in my mind like concrete setting overnight. I sat at my kitchen counter with my coffee and opened my laptop. The email to my colleague Brian took 15 minutes to compose. I kept it professional and straightforward. The apartment was available immediately. The rent was reasonable. If he was still interested, we could sign the paperwork this week. His response came within an hour. He was extremely interested. Could we meet Tuesday evening to finalize everything? I confirmed the meeting and closed my laptop, feeling something loosen in my chest. It felt good to make a decision that was mine alone, based on my priorities instead of my family's expectations. Work that day was demanding in the way I had come to appreciate. A major pharmaceutical company was launching a new cardiovascular medication, and my team was coordinating the rollout across the entire Midwest region. I spent hours in meetings, reviewing marketing strategies, training materials, and compliance protocols. The complexity required my full attention, which meant I didn't have mental space to replay Sunday dinner in my mind. By the time I left the office at 7 that evening, I felt centered again. Focused. Ready. I stopped at my old apartment on the way home, using my key to let myself in. The space felt familiar and foreign at the same time. I had lived here through some of the hardest years of my career, back when I was still proving myself and working 80-hour weeks without complaint. The walls held memories of late nights studying market research, early mornings preparing for presentations, weekends spent learning everything I could about the pharmaceutical industry. Victoria had never asked about those years. She knew I worked in pharmaceuticals, but she had never inquired about the specifics. She didn't know about the 60-page proposal I wrote that landed my first major hospital network account. She didn't know about the certification courses I completed while my friends were vacationing. She didn't know because she had never asked, and I had stopped offering information about my work years ago when I realized my success made everyone uncomfortable. It was easier to let them think I was lucky. Easier than explaining that luck had nothing to do with any of it. I walked through the apartment, mentally cataloging what I needed to remove before Brian moved in. My furniture was already in the penthouse, but I had left some kitchen items, linens, and decorative pieces. Nothing particularly valuable, but I didn't want to leave anything that would give Victoria ammunition later. My phone buzzed while I stood in the bedroom. A text from my mother. Victoria is so excited about the apartment. She's already picked out paint colors. You're such a good sister. I stared at the message for a long moment. Victoria had picked out paint colors for an apartment she didn't own and hadn't been officially given permission to occupy. She was already treating my property like her personal project, and my mother was encouraging it. I typed a response. Glad she's excited. Nothing more. No corrections. No warnings. I wasn't going to telegraph my next move. Another text came through, this one from Victoria herself. Hey, can I come by the apartment tomorrow to measure the windows? Want to get curtains ordered. My jaw tightened. She was already measuring windows, already ordering curtains, already living in a future where my apartment belonged to her, where my years of paying rent and maintaining the space dissolved into irrelevance because my mother had made a pronouncement over Sunday dinner. I responded, I'm busy this week. Let's talk next week. Her reply was immediate. No worries, Mom has your spare key. She said I could grab it. Of course, my mother had kept my spare key. Of course, she was already facilitating Victoria's access to my apartment without asking. The presumption was breathtaking. And yet it wasn't surprising at all. This was how it had always been. My parents smoothing Victoria's path, removing obstacles, ensuring she never had to work too hard for anything, and I had enabled it by being the reliable one, the one who didn't complain, the one who made things easy. I left the apartment and drove home through downtown Minneapolis, watching the skyline glow against the darkening sky. My penthouse building was 42 stories of glass and steel, sitting in the heart of the business district. I had toured 8 different properties before finding this one, comparing amenities and layouts and resale values with the same thoroughness I brought to my work presentations. When I finally made an offer, I had been confident it was the right choice. Walking into my building lobby still gave me a small thrill of satisfaction. The polished marble floors, the modern art installations, the concierge who greeted me by name, all of it represented choices I had made for myself. Nobody had given me this. Nobody had arranged it, or smoothed the path, or removed the obstacles. I had earned every part of it. In my apartment, I made dinner and ate while reviewing the rental agreement Brian and I would sign tomorrow. Everything was straightforward. 12-month lease, reasonable rent, standard terms. He was a good tenant prospect, stable job, excellent credit, no pets or smoking. Exactly the kind of person I wanted occupying my property. My phone rang at 9. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, not quite ready for whatever conversation she wanted to have. When I played the message later, her voice was warm and chatty. Hi, sweetie. Just calling to say thank you again for helping Victoria. She's over the moon about the apartment. Call me back when you can. I deleted the message and went to bed, setting my alarm for 6. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day, and I needed to be sharp. Tuesday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Minneapolis feel like the best place on earth. I wore my navy suit to work, the one I reserved for important meetings and presentations. Today felt important, even if nobody else knew it yet. Brian met me at the apartment at 6 that evening. He was 41, relocating from Chicago to manage a hospital system's pharmacy operations. We had worked together on several regional projects, and I knew him to be professional, responsible, and easy to work with. Exactly the kind of tenant I wanted. "This is perfect," he said, walking through the apartment with visible relief. "My family is coming out next month, and having space that's already set up will make the transition so much easier." We sat at the kitchen counter and went through the paperwork page by page. I explained the building policies, the parking arrangements, the maintenance procedures. He asked intelligent questions and took notes. Within an hour, we had both signed the lease agreement. "I can move in this weekend," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "This really solves a major problem for me. I appreciate you thinking of me." After he left, I stood in the apartment for a few minutes, feeling the finality of what I had just done. This space was no longer mine to give away. It belonged to Brian now, at least for the next 12 months. Victoria couldn't move in. My mother couldn't redistribute it. The decision had been made, and it was binding. I locked the door behind me and drove home, stopping to pick up Thai food on the way. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Victoria and 2 text messages asking when she could start moving things in. I didn't respond. Let her wonder. Let her make plans that would never materialize. Wednesday morning, I focused on a product launch presentation that consumed most of my attention. The pharmaceutical company I represented was introducing a new treatment for hypertension, and my team needed to coordinate with over 200 physicians across Minnesota and Wisconsin. I spent the day reviewing clinical trial data, preparing educational materials, and strategizing about how to approach different hospital networks. Around 4 that afternoon, my phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I stepped into an empty conference room to take the call, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "Danielle, I need to talk to you about the apartment," she said without preamble. Her voice carried an edge I recognized, the one that appeared when things weren't going according to her plan. "What about it?" I kept my tone neutral, giving nothing away. "Victoria went by there yesterday to drop off some boxes, and the spare key didn't work. She thought maybe you changed the locks." "The locks are fine," I said. "The key works." "Well, she couldn't get in. She had boxes of her things and nowhere to put them. She had to drive them all the way back to her current apartment." I pictured Victoria standing outside my apartment building with boxes, confused and frustrated that her assumed future wasn't unfolding as planned. I felt no sympathy, only a cold satisfaction that my boundaries were finally holding. "Mom, I didn't say she could move things in yet. You announced she was taking the apartment, but we never actually discussed the details." There was a pause. I could hear my mother processing this, trying to understand why I was suddenly introducing complications into what she had clearly considered a settled matter. "What details are there to discuss? You have the apartment, she needs it, and you're not using it. It's simple." "It's not actually that simple," I said carefully. "The apartment is my property. I've been paying rent on it for 5 years. I have plans for it." "Plans? What plans? You already moved into that expensive condo. Why do you need to keep the old apartment?" This was the moment. I could back down, apologize for the confusion, and let them steamroll me again. Or I could hold my ground and deal with the consequences. "I rented it to someone else," I said. "Brian, a colleague from Chicago. He signed the lease yesterday and moves in this weekend." The silence on the other end of the call was absolute. I could practically hear my mother's mind racing, trying to reorganize reality around this new information that didn't fit her narrative. "You what?" "I rented the apartment to a colleague who needed housing. He's relocating for work and needed a place quickly. It worked out perfectly." "But Victoria was supposed to move in there. I told you that on Sunday." "You announced it," I corrected. "You didn't ask. And I never actually agreed to let her have it. I said it sounded fine, which isn't the same as saying yes." "That's semantics, Danielle. You knew what I meant. And you assumed I would just hand over my apartment without any discussion about what I might want to do with it. That was your assumption, not my promise. My mother's voice rose slightly, frustration bleeding through her usual composure. This is incredibly selfish. Your sister needs a place to live and you have more than enough space. How could you rent it to some random colleague instead of helping your own family? The word selfish landed like it always did, designed to make me question myself, to make me feel small and ungrateful. But this time, it didn't work. This time I felt nothing but clarity. Brian isn't random. He's a respected professional who needs temporary housing. And Victoria has a place to live right now. She has a lease until the end of October. That gives her 6 weeks to find something else. 6 weeks isn't enough time. Do you know how hard it is to find decent housing on short notice? I imagine it's exactly as hard as it was for me when I was her age, I said quietly. But I managed. Victoria can manage too. Another pause. Then, in a voice that carried both disbelief and anger, I cannot believe you would do this to your sister. After everything your father and I have done for you. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself against the familiar guilt trip. I need to get back to work, Mom. I'll talk to you later. I ended the call before she could respond, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back now. Whatever came next, I would face it knowing I had finally stopped letting them write my story. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from Victoria. Are you kidding me right now? Mom said you rented the apartment to someone else? I turned my phone face down on the conference table and returned to my presentation. The pharmaceutical data needed my attention more than Victoria's outrage did. That evening, I received 6 more calls from my mother and 4 from Victoria. I ignored all of them. By the time I went to bed, there were 14 unread text messages in our family group chat, most of them from Victoria expressing shock and betrayal in increasingly dramatic terms. I slept better than I had in months. Thursday morning arrived with an email from my father. He rarely inserted himself into family dynamics, preferring to let my mother handle what he considered emotional matters. Seeing his name in my inbox meant the situation had escalated beyond my mother's ability to manage. The email was brief. Danielle, your mother is very upset about the apartment situation. I think we need to have a family meeting to discuss this properly. Can you come to dinner Sunday? We should resolve this in person. I read the message 3 times, analyzing the careful phrasing. Not a request, really, despite the question mark. A summons dressed up as an invitation. The assumption that I was the problem to be resolved, not the person whose property had been volunteered without consent. I responded, I have work commitments this weekend, maybe later this month. It was a lie. My weekend was completely free. But I wasn't ready to sit at that dining room table and defend choices I had every right to make. I wasn't ready to watch my parents position me as the villain in a story where I was simply protecting my own interests. My father's response came within minutes. This is important, Danielle. Your sister is in a difficult position now because of your decision. We need to find a solution. There it was. The framing that made me responsible for Victoria's housing crisis, as if I had created the problem rather than simply refusing to solve it. Never mind that Victoria had known her lease was ending for months. Never mind that she could have started apartment hunting like every other adult in the world. The narrative had already been written. I was being unreasonable, and the family needed to intervene. I closed my email and focused on work. My team was preparing for a major presentation to a hospital network in Wisconsin, and I needed to review the pricing proposals and competitive analysis. The work was complex enough to demand my full concentration, which was exactly what I needed. Around 11, my desk phone rang. The receptionist's voice came through. Danielle, there's a Victoria here to see you. She says she's your sister. My jaw tightened. Victoria had never visited my office before. She barely knew where I worked beyond the general industry and company name. Showing up unannounced meant she was either desperate or dramatic, possibly both. Tell her I'm in meetings all day, I said. I can't see her. She says it's urgent. I'm sure it is, but I still can't see her. There was a pause. Then the receptionist's voice came back, slightly apologetic. She's saying she'll wait until you're free. I closed my eyes briefly, counting to 5 before responding. Inform her that I have back-to-back meetings until 7 p.m. and there's no possibility of fitting her in today. Suggest she call me later if she needs to discuss something. Another pause. Okay, I'll let her know. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Really? You can't even give me 5 minutes? This is so typical of you. I didn't respond. Whatever Victoria thought was typical of me was her problem, not mine. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and strategic planning. By the time I left the office at 6:30, I was exhausted, but satisfied with what we had accomplished. The Wisconsin presentation was solid. Our team was prepared. We had a legitimate shot at securing the contract. I stopped at the grocery store on my way home, picking up ingredients for the pasta dish I had been craving all week. Something simple and comforting that required just enough focus to keep my mind occupied. While I was selecting tomatoes, my phone rang again. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail like all the others. But something made me pick up, some instinct that this call might be different. Hello, Mom. Danielle. Her voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. Victoria showed up at your office today. You refused to see her. I was working. I had meetings. She drove 40 minutes to talk to you, and you couldn't spare 5 minutes for your own sister. I shifted the phone to my other ear, still holding the tomatoes. A woman pushing a cart past me glanced over with mild curiosity before moving on. Just another person having a difficult phone conversation in the produce section. Mom, Victoria showing up at my workplace without calling first doesn't create an obligation for me to drop everything. I was actually in meetings. I wasn't avoiding her. You've been avoiding all of us since Sunday. You won't return calls, you won't answer texts, and now you won't even see your sister when she makes the effort to come to you. This behavior is unacceptable. The word unacceptable echoed through my mind. My behavior was unacceptable. Not Victoria's assumption that she could move into my apartment without asking. Not my mother's announcement of a decision she had no authority to make. Not my father's framing of me as the problem. My setting of boundaries was what crossed the line into unacceptable territory. I've been busy with work, I said evenly. It's not personal. Everything about this is personal. You rented your apartment to a stranger instead of letting your sister live there. That's about as personal as it gets. Brian isn't a stranger. He's a professional colleague, and the apartment is my property to rent to whoever I choose. Your sister is your family. Family comes first, Danielle. I raised you better than this. The groceries in my cart suddenly felt heavier. I was standing in the middle of a supermarket having a conversation that needed to end before I said something I couldn't take back. I need to go, Mom. I'll call you later this week. Don't you dare hang up on me. We are not finished discussing. I ended the call and immediately turned my phone to silent mode. My hands were shaking slightly as I continued shopping, mechanically selecting items and placing them in my cart. By the time I reached the checkout line, I felt hollowed out and exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. At home, I made my pasta and ate it while staring out the window at the city lights. My phone showed 23 unread messages in the family group chat. I didn't open them. Whatever Victoria and my mother were saying, I didn't need to read it tonight. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and reviewed the rental agreement I had signed with Brian. Everything was legally binding. He would take possession on Saturday. There was a security deposit, first month's rent, and a clear termination clause. No loopholes. No wiggle room for my family to somehow override the contract. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing the decision was final. They couldn't guilt me into changing my mind because there was nothing to change. The apartment was rented. Victoria would have to find somewhere else to live. And I would have to live with being the family villain, at least for a while. My phone rang again around 9 p.m. I glanced at the screen and saw my father's name. This time I answered. "Hi, Dad." "Danielle, your mother is beside herself. I need you to help me understand what's happening here." His voice was calm, reasonable, the tone he used when mediating business disputes. I almost laughed. Almost told him that treating me like a difficult negotiation was exactly the problem. But I was too tired for that fight. "It's simple, Dad. I rented my apartment to someone who needed it. Victoria is upset because she assumed she could have it. But I never agreed to that." "Your mother says she discussed it with you on Sunday." "She announced it. She didn't ask. There's a difference." "That seems like semantics to me, honey. When your mother said Victoria would be moving into your apartment, and you said it sounded fine, that was an agreement. You led them to believe it was settled." I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Outside, the city hummed with activity. People living their lives, making their choices, setting their boundaries. None of them were having this conversation right now. "I said it sounded fine because I didn't want to argue at dinner," I admitted. "But that wasn't me agreeing to hand over my property. That was me avoiding a confrontation. And look where that got us. Now we have a confrontation anyway, but it's worse because Victoria made plans based on what she thought was decided. Victoria made plans based on assumptions. That's not my fault." My father sighed, a long exhale that carried disappointment and frustration in equal measure. "Danielle, I'm asking you to reconsider. Can you break the lease with your colleague? Surely there's some way to undo this." "There isn't. And even if there were, I wouldn't. Brian needs this apartment. He's relocating his family. I gave him my word. You could give your word to your sister instead. I don't owe Victoria my apartment just because she needs one. She's an adult. She can find her own housing like everyone else." The silence that followed was heavy with all the things my father wasn't saying. I could imagine him at home, probably in his study, trying to figure out how to manage 2 upset women and 1 stubborn daughter who had suddenly stopped being manageable. "Your mother thinks you're being vindictive," he finally said. "She thinks you're punishing Victoria for being the younger sister." The accusation stung more than I expected. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? I opened my mouth to explain, to lay out years of frustration and resentment and feeling like my role in the family was to be the solution to everyone else's problems. But the words wouldn't come. How did I explain that I was tired of being reliable? Tired of watching Victoria drift through life while I worked myself to exhaustion? Tired of being expected to sacrifice without anyone noticing the sacrifices? "It's about me making my own choices with my own property," I said instead. "That's all it needs to be about." "I hope you're prepared for the consequences of this choice," my father said quietly. "Your mother is very angry, and Victoria feels betrayed. This is going to damage your relationships with them. Then I guess that's the price I pay for having boundaries." We ended the call shortly after that, both of us out of words that would make any difference. I went to bed feeling bruised and uncertain, wondering if I had made the right choice or just burned bridges I couldn't rebuild. Friday morning brought unexpected clarity. I woke at 5:30, went for a long run, and returned to my apartment feeling more centered than I had all week. The conversation with my father had crystallized something important. My family saw my boundaries as damage to our relationships, rather than seeing their violation of those boundaries as the actual damage. That reframing changed everything. I showered, dressed, and headed to work with renewed energy. My team had final preparations for the Wisconsin presentation, and I threw myself into the details with the kind of focus that had always been my greatest strength. By noon, we had polished the proposal until it gleamed. By 3, we had rehearsed the presentation twice and addressed every potential objection we could anticipate. My boss stopped by my office around 4. Theodore was 61, a veteran of pharmaceutical sales who had taken a chance on me 8 years ago when I was still green and overeager. He had mentored me through my early mistakes and celebrated every promotion along the way. "The Wisconsin presentation looks excellent," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "You've really pulled the team together on this one." "Thank you. I think we have a strong shot at the contract." "I agree." He studied me for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Everything okay outside of work? You've seemed distracted this week." I hesitated, then decided honesty was easier than deflection. "Family issues. Nothing that affects my work." "I'm not worried about your work. I'm worried about you. You've been here past 7 every night this week. That's excessive even by your standards." "I'm fine. Just prefer to be busy right now." Theodore nodded slowly. "I've known you long enough to recognize when you're using work as an escape. Whatever's happening at home, don't let it consume you. You're too good at what you do to let personal drama derail your career." After he left, I sat at my desk thinking about his words. Was I using work as an escape? Probably. But work was also the one place where my competence wasn't questioned, where my boundaries were respected, where I didn't have to justify my decisions to people who had already decided I was wrong. My phone buzzed with yet another text from Victoria. "Moving day is tomorrow. Where are the keys to the apartment?" I stared at the message, genuinely baffled by her persistence. We had established that the apartment was rented to someone else. My mother knew. My father knew. Victoria herself knew, based on her furious texts earlier in the week. And yet here she was, still acting like she was moving in tomorrow. I typed a response. "Victoria, I told you the apartment is rented to someone else. Brian moves in tomorrow, not you." Her reply came within seconds. "Mom said that's not happening. She said you're going to fix this before tomorrow," my mother said. As if my mother's pronouncements could override a legally binding lease agreement. As if reality would reshape itself around her preferences if she just insisted firmly enough. I called my mother directly, bypassing text messages entirely. She answered on the first ring. "Danielle, have you come to your senses?" "Mom, why is Victoria still planning to move into my apartment tomorrow? I told you I rented it to someone else. I don't believe you actually did that. I think you're bluffing to make a point." The certainty in her voice was staggering. She had decided my decision wasn't real, and therefore it didn't count. Reality was negotiable in her worldview, subject to revision based on what she wanted to be true. "I'm not bluffing. Brian signed a lease. He's moving in tomorrow morning. Victoria cannot move in because someone else is legally occupying the apartment." "Then cancel the lease. Tell this Brian person that there was a misunderstanding, and the apartment isn't available after all." "I'm not doing that. The lease is binding. Brian is relocating his family based on this agreement. I gave him my word." "Your word to your family should matter more than your word to some colleague." "My word matters equally to everyone. That's what integrity means." My mother's laugh was sharp and humorless. Integrity. That's rich coming from someone who lied to her sister and let her believe she had a place to live. "I never told Victoria she could have the apartment. You told her that. You created this mess, not me." "How dare you speak to me that way? I am your mother, and you will show me respect." "Respect goes both ways, Mom. You didn't respect me enough to ask before giving away my property. You didn't respect my plans or my autonomy. You just assumed I would comply. Because that's what family does. We help each other. We make sacrifices for the people we love. But apparently you're too selfish to understand that." The word selfish again, wielded like a weapon designed to cut through my defenses. But I was done letting that word control me. If helping family means giving up my property without discussion, then yes, I'm too selfish for that. And I'm okay with being selfish by your definition. I ended the call before she could respond, my heart racing with adrenaline. I had never spoken to my mother that way before. never challenged her so directly. The transgression felt enormous and liberating in equal measure. My phone immediately started ringing again. I sent the call to voicemail and turned off my ringer. Whatever my mother had to say, I didn't need to hear it today. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of emails and final preparations. By the time I left the office, dusk was settling over Minneapolis, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I drove home slowly, letting the beauty of the autumn evening settle some of my agitation. Brian called as I was parking in my building's garage. "Hey Danielle, just confirming everything for tomorrow. I'm planning to arrive around 9 a.m. Does that work?" "That's perfect. I'll meet you there with the keys." "Great. And thanks again for this. My wife and kids are flying in next week, and having this place ready makes everything so much easier." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, letting the reality sink in. Tomorrow morning, Brian would move into my old apartment. The decision would be final, irreversible, no longer subject to my family's attempts at negotiation or guilt. And somewhere across the city, Victoria was still packing boxes, still believing she would somehow get what she wanted, because that's how things had always worked for her. I felt a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction. Guilt because I knew what was coming tomorrow would hurt her. Satisfaction because for once, the universe was going to teach her a lesson. I had tried to teach her more gently for years. I went upstairs to my penthouse and made dinner, forcing myself to eat even though I wasn't particularly hungry. My phone showed 47 unread messages in the family group chat. I didn't open them. Whatever crisis was unfolding in those messages, I wasn't participating tonight. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and stood at my window, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness fell. Tomorrow would be difficult. Tomorrow would probably damage my family relationships in ways that might never fully heal. Tomorrow would force everyone to confront the fact that I was no longer willing to be the path of least resistance. But tonight, I was at peace with my choices. Tonight, I knew I had done exactly what I needed to do. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. I dressed carefully in jeans and a comfortable sweater, the kind of outfit that said I was relaxed and unbothered, even though my stomach was twisted with anticipation. Brian had confirmed he would arrive at my old apartment at 9 a.m. I planned to get there by 8:30 to make sure everything was ready. I made coffee and toast, forcing myself to eat breakfast while reviewing my schedule for the day. After meeting Brian and handing over the keys, I had nothing planned. Maybe I would go to the gym. Maybe I would finally tackle the book I had been meaning to read for 3 months. Maybe I would just exist in my apartment without thinking about family drama for a few precious hours. My phone rang at 7:45. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, listening to the message a few minutes later. "Danielle, I'm leaving my apartment now. The movers will be there at 9:30. Please have the keys ready. And can you help me decide which bedroom I should take? I'm thinking the one with the better closet, but I want your opinion since you lived there. Call me back." Her voice was cheerful, excited, completely convinced that today was going to unfold according to her plans. No acknowledgement of our conversations this week. No recognition that I had explicitly told her the apartment was unavailable. She had simply decided that reality would conform to her desires if she ignored everything else. I saved the voicemail without responding and headed out. The drive to my old apartment took 20 minutes through quiet Saturday morning streets. I parked in my usual spot and walked to the building entrance, feeling a strange nostalgia for this place that had been my home for so long. The doorman greeted me by name, and I chatted with him briefly about the new tenant moving in today. Inside the apartment, everything was clean and ready. I had spent several hours earlier in the week, removing my remaining possessions, cleaning thoroughly, and making sure Brian would walk into a pristine space. The morning light filtered through the windows, highlighting the hardwood floors and the built-in bookshelves that had sold me on this place 5 years ago. I stood in the living room, remembering the life I had built here, the late nights preparing for meetings, the quiet mornings before the city woke up. the slow transformation from ambitious young professional to accomplished director. This apartment had witnessed my growth in ways my family had never bothered to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. "Running a few minutes early. We'll be there around 8:45 if that's okay." I confirmed it was fine and spent the next few minutes doing a final walkthrough, checking that everything was in order. The apartment felt empty and full simultaneously. Empty of my belongings, but full of memories that would stay with me regardless of who lived here next. At 8:47, Brian knocked on the door. I let him in, smiling at his obvious relief to finally be here. "This is perfect," he said, walking through the space with the same appreciation I had felt years ago. "My wife is going to love it." We spent 20 minutes going over the details: thermostat settings, parking garage access, building amenities, nearby restaurants and grocery stores. I handed him the keys, and we shook hands on the completed transaction. Legally, the apartment was now his responsibility. My role here was finished. "Thanks for making this so easy," Brian said as I prepared to leave. "I know you could have rented this place to anyone, so I appreciate you thinking of me." "You're a good tenant," I replied. "I'm glad it worked out." I left the building at 9:15, walking to my car with a sense of completion. Whatever happened next with my family, this part was done. The apartment was occupied. The lease was signed. There was no undoing any of it. I was halfway to my car when I heard a vehicle pull up behind me. I turned and saw a moving truck, battered and slightly too large for the narrow street. Victoria emerged from a car that parked immediately behind the truck. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked excited and stressed in equal measure, calling instructions to the two movers who were already climbing out of the truck. Then she saw me. "Oh, good. You're still here." She jogged over, slightly breathless. "I was worried we'd miss you. Do you have the keys? The movers want to start bringing stuff up right away." I looked at her, at the truck full of her belongings, at the movers waiting for direction. Everything in her posture and expression indicated she genuinely believed this day was going to proceed as planned. "Victoria, I don't have keys for you." She laughed, assuming I was joking. "Come on, don't mess with me right now. I'm stressed enough about the move." "I'm not messing with you. I don't have keys because you're not moving into this apartment." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about? This is moving day. Mom confirmed it with me last night." "Mom confirmed something that isn't happening. The apartment is already occupied. I just handed the keys to Brian 20 minutes ago." Victoria stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "That's not funny, Danielle. It's not a joke. I rented the apartment to a colleague. He moved in this morning. You can't live here because someone else already does." The color drained from her face. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. But I have movers. I have all my stuff in that truck. I gave up my old apartment. The lease ended yesterday. You shouldn't have done any of that without confirming the apartment was actually available." "Mom said it was available. She said you agreed." "Mom made an assumption. I never agreed to anything." Victoria's expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally landed on anger. "You let me pack everything. You let me hire movers. You let me give up my apartment. And now you're telling me I have nowhere to go?" "I told you the apartment was rented. I told Mom. I told Dad. Nobody listened because you all assumed I would eventually cave. But I didn't, and now here we are." One of the movers approached, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding. "Excuse me, miss? Where do you want us to unload?" Victoria turned to him, her voice rising with panic. "I don't know. There's been a mistake." "Just wait a minute." She pulled out her phone and called someone, pacing in small circles while she waited for them to answer. I assumed it was my mother based on the immediate explosion of words that followed. "Mom, she actually did it. She actually rented the apartment to someone else. I'm standing outside with movers and all my stuff, and there's nowhere to go. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to live? I could hear my mother's voice through the phone, high-pitched and angry, though I couldn't make out the specific words. Victoria's face crumpled, tears starting to stream down her cheeks. "This is insane," she said, looking at me with genuine hatred. "You're my sister. How could you do this to me?" "I made a choice about my own property," I said quietly. "That's all I did." "You ruined my life. You assumed you could have something that was never yours. That's not me ruining your life. That's you facing a consequence." The mover approached again, more insistent now. "Miss, we're on the clock. We need to know where we're taking this stuff." Victoria looked at the truck, at me, at her phone where my mother was still talking. The full reality of the situation was hitting her, and I could see the exact moment when she realized there was no fixing this. No arguing her way into the apartment. No convincing me to change my mind. She was homeless, at least temporarily, and it was nobody's fault but her own for making plans based on assumptions. "Take everything to storage," she finally told the mover, her voice thick with tears. "I'll figure out where I'm living later." She turned back to me, mascara running down her face, her entire body shaking with rage and humiliation. "I will never forgive you for this. Never." I felt a pang of something. Regret, maybe, or sadness at how badly this had fractured our relationship. But I didn't regret my decision. I regretted that it had come to this, that my family had pushed me to this point. But I didn't regret protecting my boundaries. "I'm sorry you're in this situation," I said honestly. "But I'm not sorry for making my own choices." "Go to hell, Danielle." She walked back to the movers, giving them instructions through her tears. I stood watching for another moment, then got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Victoria standing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly as she spoke to whoever was on the other end. The moving truck sat idle, its back door still closed, all of Victoria's possessions trapped inside with nowhere to go. I drove for 20 minutes before pulling into a coffee shop parking lot. My hands were shaking, and I needed a moment to process what had just happened. The look on Victoria's face when reality finally hit her, the panic in her voice, the hatred in her eyes. I had done this. I had orchestrated this exact moment by refusing to back down, by holding my boundaries even when it would have been easier to cave. Part of me felt terrible. Another part felt vindicated in a way I had never experienced before. My phone started ringing. My mother. Then my father. Then my mother again. I turned the phone off completely and went inside the coffee shop, ordering a latte and finding a quiet corner table. I sat there for an hour, watching other people come and go, living their normal Saturday mornings without family drama exploding around them. A couple debated which pastry to split. A man worked on his laptop, completely absorbed. A teenager complained to her friend about college applications. Normal problems, normal lives. When I finally turned my phone back on, there were 32 missed calls and over 50 text messages. I scrolled through them with detached interest. Victoria. I hope you're happy. You destroyed everything. My mother. Call me immediately. This has gone too far. My father. Danielle, you need to fix this. Your sister is having a breakdown. More from Victoria. Everyone knows what you did. Everyone knows what kind of person you really are. My mother again. I don't know how we raised such a cold, selfish daughter. This is unforgivable. I read them all without responding. Let them rage. Let them process. I had done what I needed to do, and their anger didn't change that. I drove home to my penthouse, stopping at a bookstore on the way. I bought 3 novels I had been meaning to read, and an expensive coffee table book about architecture. treats for myself, rewards for having the courage to hold my ground. Back in my apartment, I made lunch and ate it slowly, savoring the quiet. No angry phone calls, no guilt trips, no demands for my time, my resources, my space. Just me, in the home I had earned, making choices that served my own interests. My phone rang again around 3 p.m., a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Danielle, it's Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. The one family member who had always seemed to understand that my mother's favoritism toward Victoria was problematic. Hi, Aunt Caroline. I just got off the phone with your mother. She's absolutely beside herself about what happened this morning. I'm sure she gave you her version of events. She did. And then I called Victoria, who gave me her version. And now I'm calling you because I want to hear what actually happened. I explained everything. The Sunday dinner announcement, the rental to Brian, Victoria showing up with movers this morning. Aunt Caroline listened without interrupting. Good, she said when I finished. Good? Someone needed to let Victoria face reality. Your mother has been enabling her for 28 years. This was bound to happen eventually. Relief flooded through me. You're the only person who thinks I did the right thing. I'm probably not the only one. I'm just the only one brave enough to say it out loud. Your mother is furious with me now too, but that's fine. She'll get over it. We talked for another 30 minutes. Aunt Caroline shared stories about my mother's similar patterns when they were growing up, about the favoritism she had experienced in reverse. It took me years to set boundaries with your grandmother, she said. But once I did, my life got so much better. Stick to your guns, Danielle. You did the right thing. After we hung up, I felt lighter than I had all day. The validation from someone in my family, even if it was just one person, made the isolation feel less complete. The rest of the weekend passed quietly. I ignored calls and messages, focusing instead on the novels I had bought and the peace of my own space. By Sunday evening, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Monday morning, I returned to work with my head held high. My colleagues knew nothing about my family drama, which meant I could be professional Danielle instead of terrible sister Danielle. We had the Wisconsin presentation on Wednesday, and I threw myself into final preparations with renewed focus. The presentation went flawlessly. My team delivered with polish and expertise, and by the end, I could see approval in every executive's face. We secured a 3-year contract worth millions, and my boss made it clear that a promotion was likely in the spring. Over the following weeks, a new equilibrium emerged. My family stopped calling constantly, settling into their new narrative where I was the villain. Victoria found a small, expensive apartment and blocked me on social media. My mother sent occasional guilt-laden emails that I read but didn't respond to. My father tried a few times to mediate, but eventually accepted that I wasn't interested in apologizing. Brian and his family moved into the apartment without issue. He sent grateful updates about how perfect the space was for their transition. Sometimes I drove past the building and felt quiet satisfaction knowing I had helped someone who actually appreciated it. In November, I heard through Aunt Caroline that Victoria's financial situation was deteriorating. The expensive apartment was draining her savings, and our parents' safety net wasn't quite as generous as it used to be. She was working extra shifts and complaining about how unfair everything was. My mother discovered through mutual connections that Brian was paying exactly what Victoria would have paid if she had simply asked to rent the apartment like a normal adult. The realization seemed to give her pause, though she never apologized. December brought a tentative call from my father. We had a brief, stilted conversation about nothing important. Neither of us mentioned the apartment situation. By the time we hung up, I understood that he was trying to rebuild something on different terms. The Wisconsin contract officially launched in January. My team celebrated with dinner at an upscale steakhouse, and Theodore publicly credited my leadership for the success. For the first time in months, I felt unambiguously good about something in my life. On a cold February evening, I stood at my penthouse window watching snow fall across Minneapolis. The city looked clean and beautiful, blanketed in white. I thought about the past 6 months, about the choices I had made and the relationships I had damaged. I felt no regrets. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. "Wanted to let you know we're really happy here. The apartment has been perfect for our family. Thank you for giving us this opportunity." I smiled and sent back a brief response. This was what I had chosen to prioritize. People who appreciated what they received, who understood the value of what they were given, who didn't take my generosity for granted. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I checked the security camera, I saw my father standing in the hallway. I opened the door. "Dad, this is a surprise. Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he entered my apartment for the first time since I had bought it. He looked around, taking in the space I had created for myself. "This is beautiful," he said quietly. "You've built a really nice life here." "Thank you." We sat in the living room, and for a few minutes neither of us spoke. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "I came to apologize," he said. "Your mother and I were wrong. We shouldn't have assumed we could give away your apartment without asking. We treated your property like it was ours to distribute, and that wasn't fair to you." I felt something loosen in my chest. "Thank you for saying that. Victoria is struggling, but that's not your responsibility. She's an adult, and she needs to figure things out on her own. Your mother is starting to see that too, though she won't admit it yet." "And you? What do you see?" "I see a daughter who worked incredibly hard for everything she has, who set boundaries when we pushed too far, who stood up for herself even when it cost her." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Danielle. I should have said that months ago." Tears pricked my eyes unexpectedly. "That means a lot, Dad." We talked for another hour. Really talked. About my work and his retirement plans, and the family dynamics that had been broken for years before the apartment crisis brought everything to a head. When he left, he hugged me tightly. "Your mother will come around eventually," he said. "She just needs time." After he left, I stood at my window again, watching the snow continue to fall. My family wasn't fixed. Victoria still hated me. My mother still thought I was selfish. But my father had taken the first step toward understanding, and that was enough for now. I had set boundaries and held them. I had protected what was mine. I had refused to be the family's endless solution to problems other people created. And in doing so, I had finally learned to value my own peace more than their approval. In the months that followed, Victoria's sense of entitlement finally caught up with her in ways my family could no longer ignore or excuse. The expensive apartment she had rushed into became a financial burden she couldn't sustain, forcing her to break the lease early and move to an even smaller studio in a worse neighborhood. She had to borrow money from our parents repeatedly, and when they finally started saying no, she was forced to pick up a second job just to make ends meet. The consequences she had avoided her entire life were finally teaching her lessons I could never have conveyed through words alone. My mother, watching Victoria struggle with basic adult responsibilities for the first time, slowly began to understand that her coddling had done more harm than good, though she never quite found the words to apologize for the Sunday dinner announcement that had started everything. I stood at my penthouse window on a quiet March evening, watching the city lights flicker against the darkness, and realized I had no regrets about the path I had chosen. My relationship with my family would never be what it was, but I had learned that authentic peace mattered infinitely more than artificial harmony built on my constant accommodation. The revenge I had orchestrated wasn't about hurting Victoria. It was about finally teaching her that assumptions have consequences, that other people's resources aren't hers for the taking, and that the world doesn't rearrange itself to accommodate her desires. Looking back on that September morning when she arrived with her moving truck, I felt nothing but gratitude for having the courage to hold my boundaries, even when everyone told me I was wrong. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply refusing to be used anymore.